Many times you are being told that the conflict in the Middle East is a very complicated conflict, and one cannot describe it in black and white. So I would like to suggest here today that it is a very simple conflict, a real estate conflict, with very clear black and white, with very clear justice and injustice. No, BDS, they identified as an emerging danger because they understand that this movement can grow and grow and grow, and therefore they are fighting BDS.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City. On the internet at thestruggle.org. Our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. This is Abdullah Shalada. He was in a hospital bathroom in Hebron on November 12th. When he emerged, he was shot 4 times. A bullet behind his ear, 1 in his chest, and 2 in his hands. An Israeli raiding party of 21 had come into the hospital to arrest his cousin. No doubt the Israeli army will claim that Abdullah had come at the 21 soldiers with a knife or a gun or an atom bomb. But you know and I know that they just murdered him. While this happened, Obama was haggling with Netanyahu on how much to increase the amount of your tax money that goes to Israel. Right now, you give Israel $3.1 billion a year for its defense. Netanyahu wants $5 billion a year. Most of our program will feature Gideon Levy, the editor and columnist for Haaretz, a paper which is the Israeli equivalent to the New York Times. First, we'll have part of his talk at Brandeis University in Massachusetts, and then part of an interview I did with him in Waterbury, Connecticut. Then we'll end with some good news. First, about an ad on a Massachusetts subway, and then a court settlement for dehired Professor Steven Salaita.
Unfortunately, it seems that it's quite a sympathetic audience. In New York, we faced some disturbances, and it challenged us, I must say. I'm now at 10, almost 8, 9 days on the road, and we had some very good opportunities. And in those 10 days, things in Israel deteriorated so much that people told me that you will not recognize Israel that you left just 10 days ago. Things are really getting out of control, and we'll try to get to it. But let's speak first of all about the core issues in my view. Many times you are being told that the conflict in the Middle East is a very complicated conflict, and one cannot describe it in black and white. So I would like to suggest here today that it is a very simple conflict, a real estate conflict, with very clear black and white, with very clear justice and injustice. And one might even ask if it is a conflict at all. Because when France occupied Algeria, nobody spoke about the French-Algerian conflict. There was a French occupation in Algeria, and when this French occupation in Algeria came to its end, the conflict was over. Not complicated, not nothing. Very, very simple. Black and white it was. When it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian, whatever we call it, those who claim that it is a complicated conflict mean to say that this conflict cannot be solved, that this conflict has too many sides, but by the end of the day, it's all about justice, relative justice, by the way, not total justice, because total justice will never be achieved. Relative justice, very relative justice, and above all, and that's the core word, above all about equality. And as long as Israelis will not perceive the Palestinians as equal human beings, which they don't, and I'll elaborate about this, as long as they don't perceive them as equal human beings, nothing will be solved. And once they will perceive them as equal human beings, everything will seem totally different. I don't want to say that everything will be very simple to be solved after all those years of hatred, of fears, surely not. But it will seem totally different. For many years I'm asking myself, how come that the Israeli occupation lasts for so many years, when the Israeli society lives with it, with so much peace, with so little doubts, with so little moral questions, with such self-content and convenience and confidence, such confidence that we are not only right, we are the only one to be right. With this confidence that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, is the most moral army in the world. Many times I try to suggest to the Israelis, maybe the IDF is the second moral army in the world. You know, by the end of the day, an army which killed 500 women and 500 children last summer in Gaza, maybe it's not directly connected to morality. Or maybe it is really the second moral army in the world, and the army of Luxembourg, let's put this army, if it exists at all. Do you have an army? Do you have an army? No army, sorry. Not Luxembourg, Liechtenstein. The army of Liechtenstein is the most moral army in the world, and Israelis, rightly so, will be deeply offended. How can you dare to put a question mark at all about the morality of in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces? This deep conviction that everything is right, the occupation is right, brings you to ask yourself, how is it possible for so many years? And here I want to suggest few possible answers which rely on very deep-rooted beliefs and values in Israeli society, which enable us Israelis for so many years to maintain this occupation, and as the famous advertisement, Israeli advertisement for brass goes, to go with and to feel without. We go with the occupation and we feel almost totally without it. The first very deep-rooted belief, in my view, which is almost general in Israel, even if it's not outspoken, is the belief that we are the chosen people. Religious and seculars will share this view. They will not phrase it in the same way. The religious will talk more about the God who chose us to be the chosen people. Others will just say that we are the best, we know the best, we are always the best, and nobody will tell us what to do. This very deep-rooted value enables us Israelis to believe that there are certain things that are allowed to us and are forbidden to the rest of the world, because we are different, because we are the chosen people. Let's take, for example, a small example, the international law. Extremely important, vital. This international law, which, by the way, was formulated after World War II and after what happened in World War II. It's extremely important. It applies to all the countries in the world, not only Israel, because we are a special case. So international law, which defines very clearly what are crimes of war, what is the meaning of occupation, what is the meaning of settlement, it doesn't apply to Israel. Why? Because that's the first set of values. The second very deep-rooted value is the fact that we, the Jewish people, and we, the Israelis, are, first of all, the biggest victim in history, but what is more important to say, we are the only victim in history. Or at least the only victim in history that should be taken seriously as a victim. Because even the Armenians are not suiting enough to carry the title of being a big victim of history. This enables us to think that if we are the biggest victims in history, again, it gives us special rights and special privileges because we are victims. The late Golda Meir, Israeli Prime Minister, phrased it in the best way. She said it directly, as she always said direct things. She said, after the Holocaust, the Jews have the right to do whatever they want. As simple as that. That's the lesson. And that's the lesson that, in one way or the other, we are trying to teach the younger generations in Israel when we send all of them with tens of thousands to Auschwitz, to those studying missions. That's basically the message that they get there. We are the victims, we are the only victims, and after the Holocaust we have the right to do whatever we want, and our only way to live will be on our sword, on our military power, and all the rest is quite minor. Because one should remember that there were more brutal occupations in history. And there were even longer occupations in history than the Israeli one. But I cannot recall one example in which the occupier presents himself as the victim. This occupation was forced upon us. We never wanted those territories. We never want to rule the Palestinians. We don't want it, but it was imposed on us like an earthquake, like a catastrophe, like a force majeure. And we are the victims. And again, if to quote another lovely quotation from the late Golda Meir, I like to quote her here because you Americans exported her to us. She was born in Milwaukee. She was brought up in Milwaukee. She said another very interesting sentence, which is very typical. She said once that we will never forgive the Palestinians for forcing us to kill their children. So we are the victims. We kill their children, but we are obviously the victims. That's the subtext. So this feeling, very deep feeling of being the victims, with everything that goes around it, paranoia of victims, fears of victims, present ourselves for years as the David against this Goliath, as the weak one who is always in existential danger. When you speak about security, it's always about the security of the Israelis. You have never heard anybody talk about the security of the Palestinians, because we are the victims. This enables us also to live in peace with the occupation, because victims can occupy because they were victims. But that's not enough. And to this one should add another very deep-rooted belief in Israeli society. If you stretch under the skin of almost every Israeli, you will find out that Israelis perceive, I'll be very careful here, perceive the Palestinians not exactly as equal human beings like them. I once wrote that we treat the Palestinians like animals, and I got so many protest letters from animal rights organizations who rightly claim that even animals should have their own rights. But it's very clear that most of the Israelis don't perceive the Palestinians as equal human beings, and then question of human rights are less relevant, because we deal with something which is not exactly like us. They were born to kill, they are cruel, they are bloodthirsty, almost all of them are terrorists. The only thing they want is to throw us Israelis to the ocean. That's the only goal in their lives. And this enables, again, to live in peace with an occupation and not to feel any moral doubts. So this three sets of beliefs, which are, again, I say, so deep-rooted, enable Israelis not to really be aware to what is being done on their behalf. For this, we have also very successful agencies which help us to maintain those beliefs, and above all, the Israeli media, which is a free media. Most of it is commercial, privately owned, without not too much ideology, but wants to please the Israelis, don't want to bother the Israelis, wants to sell newspapers to have high rating, and not to tell the full story, which most of the Israelis don't want to know. And here we get Israeli public agenda that anyone who comes from abroad can't believe how absent is the occupation in the public discourse in Israel. It doesn't exist at all. I mean, I remember years in which the joke was that two Israelis share three views. Today, three Israelis hardly share one view. Last elections, the last campaign, nobody mentioned the occupation, not from right, not from left, nothing. As if it doesn't exist, this huge elephant in our room, and no one sees this elephant. And we think that if we don't talk about this elephant, if we don't direct our eyes at this elephant, the elephant is not in the room. But the elephant is in the room and will never leave this room. And so Israelis trained themselves to live in peace with the occupation. But then there is another problem. The world. The world is very clear about the Israeli occupation, at least in a declarative level. I can't recall one issue, which the entire world is united about, like the lack of legitimacy of the Israeli occupation. No country, including even Micronesia, Israel's second ally, even Micronesia does not recognize the Israeli occupation, even not 1 meter of this occupation, and so does even the United States, and we'll get to the United States soon. So we have a problem. The world is very clear about it. So this problem was also solved. The world is anyhow against Israel. Most of the world is anti-Semitic, let's face it. Yeah. Any criticism on Israel is anti-Semitism. And by this, again, we released ourselves of any responsibility because it's the world's blame, not ours. The fact that the world hugged Israel after Oslo, rightly so, wrongly so, hugged Israel, is forgotten. Because then one can ask, where was all this anti-Semitism in the 90s, where really the world was hugging Israel, when there was really a hope for ending the occupation? No. So there is this protective shield in which Israelis believe that doesn't matter what the world says because the world is anti-Semitic and one shouldn't listen to the world. And here
I'm speaking with Gideon Levy. He writes for Haaretz. I want to talk about the media in general. First, what is your position at Haaretz?
I'm a senior member of the board. I work in Haaretz for the last 35 years, and I was deputy editor of the newspaper.
And you have a regular column?
I have a regular column. I write 3 times a week, twice a week, opinion pieces, and once a week a feature documenting the occupation.
And a lot of times Haaretz is referred to as the New York Times of Israel. But what's its circulation as a percent of, let's say, all print circulation?
It was never a big circulation. It was about the quality of the circulation. And we always believed, and we still believe, that the Israeli elite is reading Haaretz. The slogan of Haaretz was always the newspaper for thinking people. So yes, it's not very big, even though I must tell you that ever since we are in the internet, our readership just spread more.
Well, you say for the elite, so the average person, what's the biggest paper in Israel, the print?
Right now the biggest paper in Israel is Sheldon Adelson's free newspaper, Israel Hayom, Israel Now, Israel Today.
And you say Edelson, I can imagine the editorial line, but for those who don't, what does it say?
It's a pure propaganda newspaper But all the others are also pure propaganda newspaper. At least here you know to identify exactly what is the interest, because it's very transparent. This newspaper came only in one purpose, to help Benjamin Netanyahu. So if you know to identify the background, then it's much easier to read it and to analyze it. While with other newspapers, you don't always know what is the real interest.
Now, the Haaretz you can read in English. The other one that I know of is Ynet News, Yediot Aharonot. Can you tell me something about that paper?
Yediot Aharonot used to be for many years the most popular newspaper in Israel, and still is a very big newspaper. But Israel Hayom, because it is free, took over. Mm-hmm. And it's a purely commercial newspaper who has only one thing in mind: to sell as much as possible.
There's a site called The Times of Israel. It presents itself well. I don't know if Israelis read it.
No, Israelis don't read it, and I really don't know it very well. I know about its existence, but I never read it, so I can't refer to it.
So that's print media, but we're talking about secular. What about religious? I'm told that some Jews in Israel wouldn't ever read a secular newspaper. You read the religious. Is that right?
Yeah, the Orthodox wouldn't read, at least not publicly. They might read it, under the table, but there is a very popular chain of newspapers which are only for Haredim, which a secular Jew will not find his hands and his legs, because it's a different language, a different focus of interest. No photos of women, obviously.
Wait. Why not?
Because Orthodox, according to the Orthodox belief, photos of women are not allowed, obviously. Women will be hardly mentioned even by names. And it will be a very strange newspaper for seculars like me, because it will deal a lot with rabbis and with news about rabbis, and it's really for its own constituency.
What about other media? What about TV? What do people watch?
There is one TV channel, which is the big commercial channel, which is the most popular one, Channel 2. And there are some other channels. But in Israel, the social media is gradually taking over.
What do you mean by that?
People consume more Facebook than TV. And much more Facebook than printed newspapers.
Is there government-owned media?
There is a public broadcasting authority, which you may call it governmental-owned, but it's not very popular. In radio, it is very popular. On TV, they have very low rating.
And what foreign, I suppose people read everything, but when something is in the New York Times, do Israelis pay attention?
First of all, Haaretz has a contract with the New York Times, so we publish part of New York Times pieces. I mean, we can choose any piece and translate it into Hebrew and publish it in Haaretz, and we do so, as we do with some other leading newspapers in the world, like The Guardian and others. But by and large, Israelis are not exposed to foreign media at all, and they are taught to believe that foreign media is anti-Israeli and even anti-Semitic, as a generalization.
Last question has got to do with, say, activism. Often we're told that if you want to have an effect on Israel, don't write a letter to the Prime Minister, but if you got something in a foreign paper and send a copy to the Prime Minister, that worries them. Is that at all true?
No, I think it's exaggerated. I think that I don't see the Prime Minister very influenced by the attitude of the international community. Would it be so, Israel would have been in an entire different place. I think Israel, and especially this current government, learned that they could really not give expression about the world and still not be hurted at all.
What about BDS? Netanyahu sometimes talk about it as an existential threat. Is that just for propaganda purposes?
No, BDS, they identified as an emerging danger because they understand that this movement can grow and grow and grow, and therefore they are fighting BDS. As you know, in this country as well, they are fighting it through the Jewish communities and through the embassies
in a very, very serious way, and many times very brutal way, because they, and mainly Netanyahu himself, identifies this as a real danger, which speaks in favor of the BDS, because that shows that BDS has an important role. If Mr. Netanyahu sweats because of BDS, it's a sign that BDS is on the right way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Some good news out of Massachusetts, where the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority has changed course and agreed to again display ads from the Palestine Advocacy Project, after the widely criticized decision to remove them from a Boston subway station. The ads were critical of the Israeli government's treatment of Palestinians and of U.S. tax dollars being used to support those actions. You recall that last summer, Professor Steven Salaita was fired from his new tenured position at a branch of the University of Chicago because he posted some harsh but righteous tweets about Israel's rampage in Gaza. He received a lot of support from Palestine solidarity activists and those concerned about academic freedom, and he went to court. To make a long story short, Chancellor Philip Wise, the person who dehired Salaita, has lost her position as chancellor. That happened several months ago. Then on the 12th of November, it was announced the university had settled with Salaita and will pay him some $875,000 in compensation. Now, they're not going to hire him back, so we need to continue to battle to make sure that he is employed as a tenured professor by some distinguished university. But in these harsh times, it is a victory. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.